Jean Schnupp here. Welcome to another of the New Savvy Sightseer video vacation series. Today we are off to Germany. Germany can't be easily categorized, giving it a unique appeal for any traveler. I had various expectations when I went to Germany. I anticipated seeing beautiful castles in the mountains, but I wasn't sure what I'd find in the cities, such as Berlin, that were heavily bombed during the war. Berlin was quite a surprise. It's a thriving, united city. Different cities took different approaches to rebuilding after the war. Some chose to go very modern, like Frankfurt and Hamburg. Others opted to reconstruct in the original style. So although the buildings are new, they don't look it. My trip to Germany was ambitious, to say the least. I was looking for an overview of the entire country instead of just one region. So it was a bit of a whirlwind. 12 days with stays in 8 cities from Munich in the southeast to Hamburg in the northwest, and visits to 8 other cities. Since this was a lot of territory to cover, I took a tour group, so timing was out of my control. It was a good way to get a taste of the many different sides of Germany, but a bit overwhelming, and when I go again, I'll pick a specific region to stay in and really explore. Today we'll start with a little about the geography of Germany. It's bordered by 9 different countries, so its culture has had multiple influences. It has one of Europe's longest and most important waterways flowing primarily through, and that is the Rhine. The Rhine is a major transportation route and facilitated the growth of commerce in this region. In medieval times, rivers were their version of highways, and this was an especially important one because it runs 766 miles from the Swiss Alps to the North Sea, along the way passing through 5 other countries: Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Austria, France, and the Netherlands. It's a beautiful river for cruising. There's lovely towns to pop in on and towering castles like Burg Katz, which was built by Count Wilhelm II of Katzenelnbogen around 1371. He started collecting tolls from anyone passing his stretch of the river. Many of the castles were sort of robber baron castles. Every few miles, boats were held up for what were billed as customs collections, but they were more like extortion stops. Business was good, so a few years later, a rival tried to cash in on it and built his own estate about 3 miles north from Burg Katz. The rivalry was obvious, even in the naming of the second castle, Burg Maus, or Mouse Castle, the ultimate game of cat and mouse. Set so high on the mountain ridge, Katz Castle could not possibly be conquered from the valley. However, Napoleon bombed it in 1806. It was later rebuilt to its original specs. The most dangerous bend in the river swings around a rocky bluff called the Lorelei. Because of reefs in the area, many ships never made it safely past the Lorelei, and the rocky cliff became steeped in myth. Sailors claimed there was a siren with long blonde hair and blamed her and her haunting song for distracting them and leading them to their doom. If they did make it through, though, the next stop was St. Goar, a well-preserved town where sailors would give thanks after surviving the seductive and treacherous Lorelei. Ferries make getting from one little town to another very easy, and another popular stop is Boppard, a quaint town whose roots go back to old Roman times, where they established a fort and cashed in on the town's ancient healing baths. Boppard is a curious mix of modern and ancient, with sleek sculptures like these in the town's center. Southeast of St. Goar and Boppard is the Bavarian region of Germany and its capital, Munich. The city's richly ornamented town hall was built in the late 1800s and stretches almost 300 feet across and soars about 255 feet into the sky. Sitting at over a football field in length, the huge building has 6 courtyards and over 400 rooms. Its highlight is the 2-level, 28-foot-tall Glockenspiel, or carillon. It's the largest in Germany and was added to the building when it was completed in 1907. For over 100 years, it has chimed and played out for 12 minutes at 11 a.m. and midday, and then in the summer they add one at 5 p.m. It celebrates 2 historic times for Munich: The top tier depicts part of the rowdy wedding scene from the 1568 weeks long wedding of Duke Wilhelm V. It was one of the most expensive and downright decadent weddings of the Middle Ages. It was a huge deal. The bride was escorted by 3,500 mounted riders. Archdukes arrived in a train of over 1,500 horses, and more than 600 oxen were needed to feed the revelers. The whole party lasted about 2 weeks. The highlight was a joust on Marienplatz, Munich's central square in front of Town Hall, where a Bavarian knight battled a French jouster. On the Glockenspiel, the Bavarian always wins. Following that display, the bottom half starts and celebrates another major event. In 1517, barrel makers initiated a lively dance through the streets of Munich to get frightened residents out of their houses and recognize that the plague, which had claimed half the residents, was done and over, and it was time to make merry again. Bavarian Duke Wilhelm IV then ordered the dance be reenacted every 7 years, so the people would never forget the horror of the plague, nor forget to rejoice in life. 2019 was the year for the last live reenactment of the Barrel Makers, or Cooper's Dance, and featured 25 participants: dancers, hoop twirlers, clowns, and even a flag bearer. The next is scheduled for January 6th through February 17th, 2026, so get your bookings ready. The quiet little town of Aachen, by the border with Belgium, is small in size but massive in history. Its 30 thermal springs, said to be the hottest in Central Europe, have drawn people here for treating rheumatic and muscular disorders, it's believed, as far back as Neolithic times. Aachen's cathedral, built between 793 and 813, is the oldest in Europe. Charlemagne, who was crowned the first Holy Roman Emperor here in 800 AD, commissioned its building in 780 AD. For the next 600 years, it was the coronation chapel for 42 German monarchs, and it was one of the first 12 sites named by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site in 1978. Although much of the city was destroyed during the war, the cathedral was largely untouched. According to UNESCO, Aachen's cathedral is an exceptional artistic creation and symbolizes the unification of the West and its spiritual and political revival under the aegis of Charlemagne. It was the first vaulted structure north of the Alps since antiquity. The collection of the treasury of the cathedral is of immeasurable archaeological, aesthetic, and historic interest. The building is a rotunda with an 8-sided core. The octagon is encircled by a 2-story, 16-sided outer structure. Inside, the main focal point is the ceiling, with its peak at 103 feet tall, the highest built in the region at the time. The choice of the relatively rare octagonal shape reflects Charlemagne's intention to transform the architecture into a potent bearer of meanings. In part, it represents the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, which was imagined to have had an octagonal central building. Also, there's the concept that numbers and dimensions have inherent symbolic significance. The number 8 and its multiples is seen as an expression of perfection and balance. The 8 is as spiritual as it is materialistic. It's considered the great karmic equalizer, a force that just as easily creates as it destroys. The 8 balances the material and immaterial worlds. The rotunda, then, is an allegory for cosmic balance and eternal blessing. One of the cathedral's more treasured possessions is the Golden Shrine of Mary, that reportedly contains these relics: Mary's cloak, the infant Jesus' swaddling clothes, Christ's loincloth worn when he was crucified, and the cloth on which lay St. John the Baptist's head after his beheading. In a similar shrine there, Charlemagne's remains are entombed and were done there in 814. Upstairs in the rotunda, you find the famous marble Aachen throne, believed first used by Charlemagne. Up until 1531, all the kings of Germany were crowned here. The wide, towering hall of the choir is just over 100 feet tall. Its windows are some of the largest Gothic windows in existence. Aachen's association with water and its healing springs is evident throughout the town in the form of numerous fountains. The most famous and oldest fountain is the 1620 Charlemagne fountain in front of what is today Town Hall, originally his royal palace. It depicts the famous emperor with a scepter in one hand, showing the ruler of the earthly world, and the orb in the other, a symbol of the religious world. He was called the Father of Europe, and may be true in more ways than just as a political and religious leader. He had 4 wives, 11 legitimate children, 6 known concubines, and 7 illegitimate children. Aachen was a seat of imperial administration, but also the most influential center of culture in Europe. Charlemagne's palace included a school for which he recruited the best teachers in the land and encouraged women to be educated. The bleak exterior does not prepare you for the beautiful rooms inside. Unexpected is the brightly lit and painted Coronation Hall. It's about 150 feet by 60 feet. When it was completed in 1349, it was the largest non-church hall in the Holy Roman Empire. Originally, it was used for the grandest celebrations in the realm, especially coronation banquets. Today, it is the scene of the International Charlemagne Prize ceremony, awarded by Aachen citizens since 1950 to recognize work done in the service of European unification. Former U.S. President Bill Clinton got it in 2000. Among others to be recognized are Popes Francis and John Paul II, Angela Merkel, Henry Kissinger, Sir Winston Churchill, and in 2018, French President Emmanuel Macron. In the hall are 5 massive frescoes. This one above the entrance is the Battle of Cordoba from 1849 to 1850, and it was regarded as Alfred Ratel's best work and one of the most important portrayals of a battle scene. It depicts Charlemagne's reconquest in 777 of the Spanish territories that had been lost to the Muslims. It's part of a series called Charles's Cycle. They are considered a masterpiece of monumental painting. The artist had won a competition to present key stages in Charlemagne's life. He completed 4 of the 8 and then went insane in 1853. This is the last hit fully completed. Charlemagne victoriously entering Pavia in 774 after defeating the Langobards. The 5th painting was finished by Ratel's student Joseph Karen in 1861. The other 3 were never finished. As mentioned, fountains are everywhere in Aachen. One that's particularly popular with old and young alike is the Dolls Fountain. All bronze marionettes, it is a fountain full of puppet dolls. Each has a meaning for Aachen. A horse and a horseman are for the International Horse Show held in Aachen each summer. A jester in masks marks the carnival, and a professor for the doctrine and culture of the city. A market woman represents trade. A bishop for the church, a doll for the textile industry. It's a particular favorite with children since all parts are movable and they can change, for example, an arm position. It's also fun for the adults, like the guy on the right. In another German town, we associate with children, but not in a fun way. It's a tiny one in the northwest that many people are familiar with because of a strange occurrence there, Hamelin. The story is inscribed on the town hall. In the year 1284, after the birth of Christ, from Hamelin were led away 130 children born at this place, led away by a piper into a mountain. The story goes that a Pied Piper was contracted by authorities to rid the town of rats. He did a good job, but then the town reneged on his payment and the kids mysteriously disappeared. The cautionary tale is reenacted throughout the town. Records indicate that in 1284, 130 kids did disappear, but the reason is uncertain, and so the piper got blamed. The name of the street where the children were supposedly last seen is translated as Street Without Drums, and still today no one is allowed to play music or dance there. A truly compelling stop in Germany is to the Nazi rally grounds in Nuremberg. It's hard to believe one small man standing on that tiny balcony could command such a crowd assembled there. I found it oddly fitting that a sign at the entrance says, "Enter at your own risk." Up to 100,000 could pack the field during rallies. An additional 60,000 could cram onto the concrete stands. Less than 4 miles away is where the Reign of Terror came to an end for many at the Nuremberg Palace of Justice. 13 war trials were held between 1945 and 46. In the first and best known trial, 24 were indicted. 22 were put on trial. One committed suicide and another was judged mentally unfit. Some important firsts came from these trials. Since 4 different languages were involved, the trial saw the introduction of a technological innovation, instantaneous translation. IBM provided the technology to give on-the-spot translations through headphones in English, French, German, and Russian. The trials were also regarded as a milestone, leading to a permanent international court and an important precedent for dealing with later instances of genocide and other crimes against humanity. Nearby is Sicilienhof Palace, built in 1914 as the 176-room home of Crown Prince Wilhelm of Prussia and his wife Cecilia. It was the last royal home built by that dynasty. They were the last of their family to reign, and they abdicated at the end of World War I. Architects paid an amazing attention to every detail. Even chimneys were individual and unique. There were 55 Tudor Gothic chimney stacks on this house. An incredible carved staircase was a gift from the then city of Danzig. The house was built in the style of an English Tudor home in a 255-acre park. It is better known as the site of the 1945 Potsdam Conference, where Allies met to negotiate terms for the end of World War II. A little-known fact is that each leader needed to be treated in a somewhat separate but equal way. Each had his own entryway. The U.S. President, first Franklin D. Roosevelt, later succeeded by Harry S. Truman, entered through the front lobby. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, later succeeded by Clement Attlee, came in via the courtyard that you see here with a circular drive. That left only one other entry point, and so Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin went in through the back. It was not quite so grand as this, and so an arch was hastily built so it would have a more ceremonial entryway. Even in the meeting room itself, they entered through different doorways. In addition to determining post-war borders in Europe, they also worked out how Germany would be divided. Each of the 4 main Allied countries, France, Britain, US, and Russia, would control one sector of Germany, with Russia getting the easternmost section. It probably would have worked out better if they didn't take one city, the capital, Berlin, completely contained within the Russian sector, and divide that into 4 sections as well. The Russian treatment of their Germans was the harshest, and many sought to escape, especially in Berlin, to the western sectors, which led to the infamous Berlin Wall, a 96-mile barrier that zigzagged around the entire Allied-run West Berlin, even into the countryside. It was designed to stop East Berliners escaping to the west, with access between the 2 parts limited to a few specific gates or checkpoints. Around 5,000 managed to cross between 1961 and 1989. Almost 200 were killed, though, as they tried to escape. Pieces of it have been sent to other countries as a stark reminder of that terrible time. This demanding question scrawled on the wall was most poignant to me. A double row of cobblestones now marks the course of the wall over 27 miles in the center of the city. At certain intervals, there are metal plaques in the ground identifying it and bearing the dates it existed. Berlin Wall, 1961 to 1989. Gateway entrances that once limited access to the walled city are now wide open, and everywhere are symbols of capitalism. One of the gates is popularly known as Checkpoint Charlie. That was the dividing line between the Russian and American sectors. At once a heavily fortified place, signposts warned entrants they were leaving the American sector. On the American side of Checkpoint Charlie today are signs of just how deeply capitalism has made its mark. Yep, that's McDonald's and other souvenir shops on the right of your screen. The Brandenburg Gate is strongly associated with the Berlin Wall, but it actually predated the conflict by nearly 200 years. It was built between 1788 and 1791 by Prussian King Frederick Wilhelm II, likely on what was an old Roman wall fortification. It would have been used as a key entry point to the city of Berlin and a grand path to his presidential palace. Ironically, both sides, the East and the West, worked together to restore the heavily bombed arch. But then shortly afterward, the wall went up just around it, blocking the West from even accessing it. Now the gate is fully restored and accessible to all. 4 U.S. presidents have delivered pivotal speeches near the famed arch. John F. Kennedy in June of 1963 announced, "I am a Berliner." Ronald Reagan in 1987 called for Gorbachev to tear down this wall. Bill Clinton in 1994 was the first U.S. president to walk through it. And Barack Obama in 2013, on the anniversary of JFK's visit, recalled the dangers people faced to claim their most basic right of freedom. And the biggest tribute we can pay them, he said, is to pursue peace and justice. The quadriga at the top has its own history. That's the chariot drawn by 4 horses with an eagle above, meant as a sign of peace. But to Napoleon, it was a sign of success. When he took Berlin back in the early 1800s, he had it dismantled and shipped to Paris as a trophy. Well, that gives new dimension to bringing home a souvenir. The Prussians got it back when they took Paris a few years later. And I have to say, it was a little surreal to be sitting in a Starbucks looking out the window at the wide open, sun-drenched Brandenburg Gate. A fun way to enjoy Berlin is by boat on the River Spree, which runs about 250 miles through Germany and the northern Czech Republic. The part going through Berlin, though, has been singled out as among the top 10 most beautiful rivers in the world by Forbes. One of the many sights from the river is this impressive cathedral. First built in 1465 as a parish church on the Spree River, the last German Kaiser, Wilhelm II, completed its reconstruction in 1905, making it then Berlin's largest and most important Protestant church. More than 80 Prussian royals are buried in it. Another stunner along the river is the Reichstag, or the Parliament building, topped by a Norman Foster glass dome with beautiful 360-degree city views. Not all river sights are so stately. Today, we can see a lighter side of Berlin life, a much more carefree city than just a few decades ago. As a former business teacher, I loved this entrepreneur's innovative approach. The bar owner had trucked in sand to make it a beachfront cafe. The city of Dresden might sound familiar to some. It is known for china and porcelain. It suffered great destruction during the war, but has been steadily rebuilding, being faithful to the original architecture. This is the Semper Opera House, reopened 40 years to the day it was bombed. Dresden was once considered one of Europe's most important cities of culture, largely due to the efforts of 17th century German Prince Augustus the Strong, who also was ultimately named the King of Poland. Surprisingly, this piece of art was untouched during the war. It's called the Procession of the Dukes and was originally painted between 1871 and 1876. The 25,000 tile wall depicts 700 years of Saxon rulers. At 335 feet long, it is the world's largest porcelain mosaic, with Augustus roughly midway in the parade of 35 Wettin family rulers. Augustus the Strong was reputed to be quite a ladies' man, a somewhat prolific man. It is reported he fathered over 300 children. Heidelberg was the one large German city to escape the war virtually unscathed, and this was by design, not accident. The American commander was familiar with the city, especially its famous university, the oldest in Germany that was home to the Bunsen burner, and so he thought it should be saved. He was given permission to negotiate the surrender of German soldiers here. Heidelberg is the birthplace of one of my favorite musicians, Jackson Browne, and it is the post-war death place of George Patton, following a car accident. He isn't buried here, though. He's over in Luxembourg American Cemetery. The Neckar River that you see there is featured in the famous operetta, The Student Prince. Mark Twain often stayed in the town and proclaimed it to be the perfect city, not too big and not too small. In A Tramp Abroad, he wrote that above the town rises the huge ruin of Heidelberg Castle, deserted, discrowned, beaten by the storms, but royal still and beautiful. The Heidelberg Castle complex does tower over the town. It's a mashup of architectural additions dating as far back as the 1200s. Some in ruins, other parts are well restored. The Friedrich Building is the best preserved building since the Grand Duke of Baden ordered its restoration in the early 20th century. It had been built between 1601 and 1604 and contained residential apartments as well as a chapel in the basement. It also now houses the German Museum of Pharmacy, presented as the most complete and comprehensive collection worldwide, with 20,000 objects covering 2,000 years of Western pharmacy history. This apothecary makes you realize just how far medicine has come. It provides a journey through the history of medical science, focusing on the development of pharmacology, initially almost a magic art, and then evolving eventually to a science. One of the castle's more unique features is its wine cellar, where a giant barrel was built in 1591. It held 220,000 liters, about 58,000 gallons of wine that was collected from the winemakers in payment of taxes. When people think of Germany and beverages, they think more of beer than wine. But wine is a big crop. Germany is in the top 10 of the world's producers, and some go to great lengths to ensure their wine flows freely. There are an estimated 25,000 castles and palaces throughout Germany. The Summer Palace here of Frederick the Great, the King of Prussia, is one of the more interesting because of its purpose. Its name tells the story. Sanssouci Palace is translated from the French to mean without concerns, meaning no worries or carefree, indicating that the palace was a place for relaxation rather than as a seat of power. One way for sure that visitors relaxed here was with a glass of the house wine. Those terraces are actually vineyards, literally on the palace's doorstep. The palace garden is often touted as Germany's Versailles. It's easy to imagine grand parties and women promenading in gowns around the grounds. But that didn't happen here. Reportedly, no women were allowed at the estate, not even the king's wife. The king himself designed the palace and had a vision for the grounds. He had wanted a grand fountain to spout 100 feet high. But he had to settle for 60 feet. That was the highest the technology of the time could go. Overall, the location and the layout of Sanssouci was designed as an ideal of harmony between man and nature in a landscape ordered by human touch, which earned it the UNESCO World Heritage Site designation in the 1990s. On that relaxing note, I'll leave you as I close all my programs with the words of Dr. Seuss. Sometimes you don't appreciate a moment until it becomes a memory. I like to add to that to always remember to celebrate the moments and treasure the memories. To see more of Germany or any of my European destinations, go to my website. If you have any questions about this program, email me or use the contact page on my website. When libraries are again offering in-person programs, you can check my programs tab to see where I'll be. Until then, visit the library site for more video vacations by Savvy Sightseer. Auf Wiedersehen!